The mist clung to the early morning air as Evie Sinclair walked across the tarmac of Lancaster Municipal Airport. The sun, just beginning to rise, cast a golden hue over the planes lined up neatly along the runway, their metal bodies gleaming with the promise of adventure. Evie took a deep breath, savoring the cool air that smelled faintly of fuel and freedom. This was her domain, where she felt most alive, most herself. She approached her biplane, a sleek, silver beauty that she'd named Spirit of Liberty. It was her pride and joy, a machine that had carried her across miles of open sky, far from the constraints of the ground below. Today, she was preparing for a solo cross-country flight, another step in her journey to prove that women could soar just as high and as far as men. Her goal was clear: to become one of the most respected aviators of her time. As Evie performed her pre-flight checks, she heard the distant rumble of another engine. She glanced up to see a plane descending toward the runway, a World War I biplane, its wings dipped in a familiar pattern that made her heart skip a beat. The plane touched down with the practiced ease of a seasoned pilot, rolling to a stop not far from where she stood. The pilot climbed out, removing his leather helmet to reveal sandy blonde hair that caught the morning light. He was tall, with the lean, muscular build of someone who had spent years in the air. Evie recognized him immediately. Captain Jamie Harding, a war hero turned flight instructor, known for his daring maneuvers and quiet demeanor. Jamie spotted her and smiled, walking over with the relaxed confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. "Morning," he greeted, his hazel eyes warm as they met hers. "You must be Evie Sinclair." "Evie," she corrected, returning his smile. "And you're Captain Harding. I've heard a lot about you." "Likewise," Jamie replied, glancing at her plane with appreciation. "The Spirit of Liberty, right? Beautiful aircraft." "She's been good to me," Evie said, patting the plane's side affectionately. "Are you here for a lesson?" "Actually, I'm here to teach," Jamie said with a chuckle. "But I couldn't resist taking my old bird up for a spin. Helps clear the mind." Evie nodded, understanding completely. There was something about flying that made everything else fade away, the worries, the doubts, the noise of the world below. Up there, it was just you, the sky, and the roar of the engine. "Mind if I join you?" Jamie asked, nodding toward her plane. "I've heard you're quite the flyer." Evie hesitated for a moment, her independent streak flaring up. She wasn't used to sharing the cockpit with anyone, least of all someone as experienced as Jamie. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet respect that made her nod in agreement. Sure, why not? But just this once. The two of them took to the skies, the Spirit of Liberty climbing effortlessly into the air. Evie was at the controls, her hands steady and sure, but she could feel Jamie's presence beside her, a steadying force that both challenged and reassured her. They flew over the countryside, the patchwork of fields and forests stretching out beneath them, the horizon a distant line of possibility. As they soared higher, Evie felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She had spent so much of her life fighting to be taken seriously, to prove that she belonged in the sky. What with Jamie beside her, she felt something shift, as if she no longer had to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, she could share it with someone who understood. When they landed back at Lancaster Municipal Airport, the sun was higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Evie shut down the engine, her hands still tingling from the adrenaline of the flight. Jamie climbed out first, offering her a hand as she disembarked. "That was incredible," Jamie said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "You've got a real gift, Evie." "Thank you," she replied, feeling a warmth spread through her at his words. "You're not so bad yourself." They spent the next few weeks flying together, each lesson a dance of skill and trust. Jamie showed Evie new maneuvers, teaching her the advanced techniques he'd learned during the war. In return, Evie pushed him to test the limits of his own abilities, encouraging him to embrace the thrill of flight in ways he hadn't since his combat days. But as their bond deepened, so did the tension between them. Jamie was haunted by the ghosts of his past, friends he'd lost in the war, battles that still played out in his mind. He kept a distance, not just from Evie, but from everyone, as if afraid that getting too close would bring more pain. Evie, on the other hand, was fiercely independent. She had spent her entire life proving that she didn't need anyone, that she could achieve her dreams on her own. The idea of relying on someone else, even someone as capable as Jamie, made her uneasy. Their unspoken struggles came to a head one afternoon at the airport. Jamie had just completed a routine flight when his plane's engine sputtered and died midair. He was forced to make an emergency landing, his plane skidding across the runway before coming to a stop in a cloud of dust. Evie, who had been watching from the hangar, ran to his side, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the plane just as Jamie climbed out, his face pale but calm. "Jamie," she exclaimed, her voice thick with worry. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he replied, though his hands shook slightly as he removed his helmet. "Just a bit of bad luck." But Evie could see the fear in his eyes, the way he held himself as if bracing for impact. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now." Jamie looked at her, his hazel eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something he'd kept hidden for too long. "Evie," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been through a lot. Seen things I can't forget. And it scares me, the thought of losing someone else." Evie felt her heart twist at his words. She understood that fear, that overwhelming need to protect oneself from further pain. But she also knew that life was too short to live in fear, to hold back from something real, something that could bring joy as well as sorrow. "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But you don't have to carry that burden alone. You don't have to be alone, Jamie." Jamie's gaze softened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to hope. He squeezed her hand in return, a silent promise that he would try, that he would let her in. The next morning, Evie stood by her plane, her heart racing with anticipation. Today was the day she'd been planning for months, her longest solo flight yet, a journey that would take her across the country and back. But this time, she wasn't going alone. Jamie approached her, his expression serious, but determined. "Are you sure you want me along for this?" he asked, his tone teasing but with an edge of uncertainty. Evie smiled, her nerves easing at the sight of him. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't." Together, they climbed into the spirit of liberty, their movements synchronized after weeks of flying together. As the engine roared to life, Evie felt a surge of excitement, not just for the journey ahead, but for the new chapter in her life that was unfolding. They took off, the plane soaring into the sky with the grace and power that Evie had come to love. Below them, Lancaster Municipal Airport shrank into the distance, the familiar landscape fading as they flew toward the unknown. For hours, they flew in silence, the only sound the steady hum of the engine and the rush of wind against the wings. Evie felt a sense of contentment settle over her, a feeling of rightness that she hadn't known she was missing. With Jamie by her side, the sky seemed even more vast, the possibilities even more endless. As they approached their destination, Evie glanced over at Jamie, who was watching her with a soft smile. "What?" she asked, her voice crackling over the radio. "Nothing," he replied, his smile widening. "Just thinking how lucky I am to be here with you." Evie felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. "The feeling's mutual," she said, her heart swelling with emotion. They landed at a small airfield, their journey half complete. As they refueled the plane, Jamie took her hand, his touch warm and steady. Evie, I don't know what the future holds, but I want to be a part of it. Whatever comes our way, I want to face it with you. Evie looked up at him, her heart pounding with the truth she'd been afraid to acknowledge. Me too, she whispered. I've spent so long trying to prove I don't need anyone, but the truth is, I want you. I need you. Jamie pulled her into a gentle embrace, his hand cradling the back of her head as he pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then let's do this together, he murmured. Let's see how high we can fly. The journey back to Lancaster Municipal Airport was filled with a new sense of purpose, of hope. As they touched down on the familiar runway, Evie felt a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with the place and everything to do with the man beside her. They climbed out of the plane, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the tarmac. Jamie took her hand, pulling her close as they walked toward the hangar. The planes around them stood silent, witnesses to the journey they had taken, both in the air and in their hearts. Evie looked up at Jamie, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Jamie smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "No, thank you. For reminding me what it's like to truly live again." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and purple, Evie and Jamie stood together, their future as vast and open as the sky they loved. In that moment, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their hearts intertwined like the wings of their planes, soaring ever higher. And with that, they walked off into the twilight, ready to embrace whatever the future had in store, their hearts full of hope, love, and the promise of endless skies.